ditto Shia LaBeouf as Shaft. It's... Why don't we just go by merit and let the best actor win? Which seems like what happened when Ana de Armas just got picked to play Marilyn Monroe, even though she's Cuban with an accent. Hey, maybe she should play Fidel Castro and James Franco can play Marilyn Monroe, and then we can all...
Good morning. It's Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, September the 23rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Rape of the Mind, No Free Lunch, Rules for Retrogrades, Rules for Patriots, Ayn-rand, Bishop-barron, and The Enemies of My Country, Chapter 5. All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
When the government makes loans or subsidies to business, what it does is to tax successful private business in order to support unsuccessful private business. Henry Hazlitt. We must never forget that the mere existence of a benefit the government gives to some favored actor must first be taken from some other. The government does not have a subsidy tree or crony tree from which they can pick fruit and hand out at their discretion. The government's picking of winners and losers is not an act of help to those they want, but neutral to the other party. There is an active move to help one and an active move to hurt another.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The danger of mental contagion. Indeed, there is a continual danger of mental contagion. People are in constant psychic exchange with one another. As a country, we have to ask what dangerous mental pollution may come to us from the other side of the border. Let me make it crystal clear that I am far from insensitive to the danger of totalitarian subversion and aggression with which we are now faced. My own experiences with the Nazis made it painfully obvious to me that these dangers must not be minimized. As a psychologist, too, I am deeply aware of the contagious nature of totalitarian propaganda and of the fact that free citizens in a free country must be on their guard to protect themselves. But we must learn to fight these dangers in democratic ways, and I am afraid that too often in our fight against them, we may take a leaf from the totalitarian book. Let me cite but one example of this. The Feinberg Law in New York State, enacted in order to protect children against the dissemination of dangerous political propaganda, is partly based on the concept of mental contagion. It aims to protect the schools against the subtle infiltration of subversive ideas. It seems at first sight like a simple solution. You just stop subversion before it can affect the impressionable minds of our children. But the fact remains that it presents all kinds of psychological difficulties. In our fear of being polluted, we create norms and schemes against which we measure the acceptability of unorthodox ideas, and we forget that the presence of minority ideas, acceptable or not, is one of the ways in which we protect ourselves against the creeping growth of conformist majority thinking in us. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, in his dissenting opinion on the Feinberg Law, made this point. This is another of those rapidly multiplying legislative enactments which make it dangerous to think or say anything except what transient majority happens to approve at the moment. Basically, these laws rest on the belief that government should supervise and limit the flow of ideas into the minds of men. The tendency of such governmental policy is to mold people into a common intellectual pattern. Quite a different governmental policy rests on the belief that government should leave the mind and spirit of man absolutely free. Such a governmental policy encourages varied intellectual outlooks in the belief that the best views will prevail. This policy of freedom is, in my judgment, embodied in the First Amendment and made applicable to the states by the 14th. Because of this policy, public officials cannot be constitutionally vested with powers to select the ideas people can think about, censor the public views they can express, or choose the persons or groups people can associate with. Public officials with such powers are not public servants. They are public masters. We cannot prevent one mental contagion through enforcing another. The only way we can give man the strength to withstand mental infection is through giving him the utmost freedom in exchange of ideas. People have to learn to ask questions without demanding that they be answered immediately. The free man is the man who learns to live with problems in the hopes that they will be solved sometime, either in his own generation or the next. Man's curiosity and inquisitiveness have to be stimulated. We have to fight man's growing fear of thinking for himself, of being original, and of being willing to fight for what he believes in. On the other hand, we also have to learn to resist ideas. Governments may be overthrown only by physical violence, but also by mental violence, by suggestive, and mental penetration of young minds by rigid conditioning, regimentation, and prohibition of dissent. New York Times, March 4th, 1952. The explanation delusion. One of the most coercive delusions is the explanation delusion. They need to explain and interpret everything because the person has a simple ideology in his pocket. Unwittingly, the victim of this delusion wraps the magic cloak of omniscience around himself, and this provokes awe and submission in those men who have a strong need for rational explanation on phenomena they do not understand. The quack, for instance, with his gesture of omniscience, pushes his victim into a kind of nothingness, so that he feels himself become smaller and smaller in relation to the great mysteries of the world. It is this compulsive need to be the wise guy and the magician who knows all the answers that we so often find in the totalitarian world. And nobody, your author included, is completely free from seizing on these premature answers. It is among the intelligentsia, and especially among those who like to play with thoughts and concepts without really taking part in the cultural endeavors of their epoch, that we often find the glib compulsion to explain everything and to understand nothing. Their retreat into intellectual isolation and ivory tower philosophy is a source of much hostility and suspicion from those who receive the stones of intellectualism instead of the bread of understanding. The intelligentsia has a special role in our democratic world as teachers of ideas, but every teaching is an emotional reaction, a matter of loving your students. It is moving among them and taking part in their doubts in order to share together the adventure of common exploration of the unknown. Paradoxically, we may say that we need the experience with the totalitarians, if only to discover a reflection of their rigidities in our own democratic system.
And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 25. The root of cultural decay is feminism. End feminism to end radicalism. The family is the building block of society. It is the wellspring and training ground of future generations. It is the natural setting where the virtues are learned: piety, morality, prudence, frugality, decency, etiquette, and every good thing for our youth. As the family goes, so goes society. It is precisely for this reason that the family has found itself under full-fledged radical assault in the past half-century. If radicals succeed in rending asunder the family, in re-educating our kids, they will have won the culture. This is why Vladimir Lenin boasted, "Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transform the whole world." The primary vehicle that radicals have used to undermine the family is feminism. It is a bald-faced lie that the purpose of feminism is to achieve equal rights for women. That's merely the party line, fed to the ignorant and the bitter. The animating purpose of feminism has always been the overthrow of the patriarchy, the headship of men in society, and particularly in the family. It is a little-known fact that, even as far back as the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, the coming-out party for first-wave feminism, the attendant bluestockings declared, quote, The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpation on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. And that, in the covenant of marriage, the wife is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master. Unquote. Empowering women legally and politically is, for feminists, but a mere means to end patriarchy. Once the rightful leaders of the family, fathers, are deposed, radicals know that they will be free to remake the family into an arm of their apparatus, or at the very least to dismantle it as a bastion of the old order. Like Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, radicals fear nothing as much as the righteous, broad-shouldered man. However, patriarchy will not lightly be cast off. It has been willed by God from the beginning of creation. This is the reason why Adam had authority over Eve, as evidenced by him naming her, even prior to the fall, in the state of original justice. It's why God empowered Abraham, Noah, Moses, Aaron, and Joseph to guide his people. It's why Christ selected 12 men to be the princes of his church. It's why there continues to be, as a matter of Christian doctrine, an all-male priesthood. It's the reason why, throughout human history, quote, there is not nor has there ever been any society that even remotely failed to associate authority and leadership in suprafamilial areas with the male, unquote. Footnote. That's by Stephen Goldberg from Why Men Rule, A Theory of Male Dominance. End of footnote. A rebellion against patriarchy is a rebellion against God himself. It's a rebellion against the order and intelligibility of the universe. As with other failed systems like Marxism, when man attempts to set aside human nature, the consequences are dire. For years, feminists have been attempting to subvert marriage and family life in an attempt to disrupt patriarchy. They have tasted a great deal of success in their endeavor. No-fault divorce has become the law of the land, yielding a marital attrition rate of about 50%. Abortion, which, quote, frees women from maternal duties, is legal and rampant, producing 57 million human casualties in the United States alone since 1973. Contraception, another insulator against the chief gift of marriage, children, is virtually ubiquitous, with 98% of sexually active women having used a contraceptive method at some point. Feminists have also taken to attacking motherhood, shaming housewives for being lazy and unambitious, and pressuring them to take up needless glamour careers for the sake of empowerment. Currently, 70% of women have abandoned minor-age children in exchange for careers outside the home, delegating mothering duties to disinterested nannies and sterile daycare centers. As Pope Pius XII once lamented, when the mother is absent from the home, it becomes desolate for lack of care, with members, quote, working separately at different hours in different parts of the city, and hardly ever meeting one another, not even for the principal meal or for the rest at the end of the day's work, much less for family prayers, unquote. Even in many otherwise functional traditional marriages, the wife, contrary to Scripture, e.g. Titus 2:5, 1 Peter 3:1-7, and reason, has usurped her husband's authority and headship over the family, resulting in a de facto leadership vacuum. Hen-pecked, uxorious men are now the rule. The foregoing feminist machinations have produced wages of the most fetid sort. The culture has quickly become crass and despondent. Drug addiction, pornography, violence, and crudity abound. Mass shootings, which are almost always perpetuated by young men from broken homes, are now routine. Of a recent sample of 56 school shooters, a scant 10 were raised in a home with both biological parents. Studies show that a father's absence increases antisocial behavior, such as aggression, rule-breaking, delinquency, and illegal drug use, especially among boys. Since 1999, the general suicide rate has increased by 33% in the United States. However, the female suicide rate has increased by 53% to the male's 26%. For people between the ages of 10 and 24 years old, the suicide rate increased by 56% in the 10-year span between 2007 and 2017. What's more, kids raised in a single-parent home are more than twice as likely to commit suicide as their peers raised in traditional homes. Even without poring over facts and figures, one can palpably sense that we're living in a time of general Western malaise. An unseen specter has long haunted us, sending a frisson down the spine of society. Feminism has failed to deliver even on its empty promises to women. In their paper, The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness, economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers analyzed women's happiness trends between 1970 and 2005. To the surprise of many, they discovered that despite women's newfound liberation and progress, female contentment scores decreased every decade from the time the survey was administered. In other words, despite a spate of new legal rights and protections, women are less happy than they were in the dark days of widespread housewifery. In 1960, women's self-reported happiness was greater than that of men. By 2005, men were the happier sex. It's clear that we've been sold a defective product. Central as it is to the health of the culture at large, the family simply cannot be overlooked as the primary locus of the battle for the soul of society. Thus, if the retrograde is to rescue society from the clutches of radicals, he will have to do so by purifying and reinvigorating the family, the most noble and ancient of institutions. This necessitates that we discredit and decisively reject the saccharine hemlock of feminism and its contumacious rebellion against patriarchy. Men, rise up and grasp firmly the mantle of leadership in your homes. Insisting on wielding your God-given scepter of authority isn't bullying, it's your sacred duty. Hold fast to your wedding vows. Love your wives. Teach your kids diligently. But flee from any temptation to cede your rightful authority, giving way to a practical matriarchy. If we diligently attend to our families, providing for them, educating them, loving them, guiding them, and growing them, in one generation we will have taken back control of the culture from the deviants who have long plotted its demise.
And that was Rule 25 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve-Deace.
And what do Romney, McCain, and Dole have in common? You guessed it. They're all losers. They're all men a majority of the American people rejected when they had the chance to select them as commander-in-chief. So here's a simple question. If the advice these guys are giving is so good, then why didn't they win? Anybody? Anybody? Of course, nobody in the mainstream media will ask such a question because these are the standard bearers for the Republican Party they want. Lovable losers. Not to mention the party establishment each of these men represents, and the mainstream media have a common foe, folks. Us. Sadly, there have been some once respected conservative leaders who have aided and abetted Romney's resiliency. See the recent book, We Won't Get Fooled Again, Where the Christian Right Went Wrong and How to Make America Right Again, for that evidence. Now, one who was once fooled by Romney was the late, great Paul Weyrich, one of the founding fathers of the modern conservative movement. He supported Romney during his first presidential run in 2008. But when confronted with Romney's record that got him labeled the number 8 rhino in the country by Human Events 1 year before Romney launched his presidential campaign, Weyrich publicly repented in a room of his peers before he died. Now that kind of character is presidential. Reagan's rising tide lifts all boats. Romney's race to the bottom takes others down with him. That's the difference between a Republican and a warrior, albeit an imperfect one. We cannot demand perfection from imperfect vessels, but we must insist on consistency. We must provide encouragement and accountability to those who earnestly want to do what is right, and cease trusting those whose sellout actions speak louder than their conservative words. Republicans would rather lose to Democrats than lose control of the GOP to grassroots conservatives or libertarians like us. A friend of mine who is working on recruiting conservatives across the country to primary Republican incumbents once told me this, quote, "The difference between Democrats and Republicans is Democrats look for ways to fire up and engage their base to get what they want, but Republicans look for ways to do an end run around their base to get what they want." That last paragraph will be very provocative and perhaps too much unvarnished truth to swallow in one instance for some of you. But you don't have to just take my word for it. You can take it directly from a top Republican strategist named Boyd Marcus. Now, the story of Boyd Marcus proves that GOP's betrayal of its base now runs so deep and has become so obvious that the ruling class of the Republican Party isn't even trying to lie to us anymore. They are just parading their whorish shamelessness out in the open and putting it right in our faces. In 2013, Boyd Marcus decided to take a job working for Democrat Terry McAuliffe, who was running for governor of Virginia. That's the same Terry McAuliffe who is the former chairman of the Democrat National Committee. That's the same Terry McAuliffe who has been a prolific fundraiser for the Democrat Party and its liberal causes for decades, including being the top fundraiser for the Clintons in the 1990s. That's the same McAuliffe that Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal called on Democrats to drop as their gubernatorial candidate after one of his companies was revealed to be under investigation from the SEC for its soliciting of foreign investors. The bottom line is you don't get any more Democrat than Terry McAuliffe. And that's who top Republican strategist Boyd Marcus decided to go work for. When I say Marcus was a top Republican strategist, consider that he counted among his clients Congressman Eric Don't Defund Obamacare But Do Pass Amnesty Cantor, the House Majority Leader at the time this book was written. Marcus also worked for Bill Bolling, the former lieutenant governor of Virginia. Bolling was the Republican establishment's choice to be the GOP nominee for governor in 2013, but the grassroots went with State Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli instead. A bitter Bolling did little to hide his disdain for the conservative Cuccinelli, and his top consultant went to work to get the Democrat elected. By the way, notice there were no sanctimonious cries from the Republican Party ruling class for Bolling and his supporters to get on board and unify to defeat the Democrat, as conservatives are often lectured. But I digress. Understand that Boyd Marcus isn't a rhino. Boyd Marcus isn't a moderate. He's a Republican. He doesn't represent the stupid party as we have preferred to describe them because that spoonful of sugar helps the treacherous medicine go down, rather than us admitting what we really know the truth to be. And that truth is people like Marcus are actively working to help the other team score points. And any competitor knows that whoever scores points for your opponent is really your opposition, no matter which jersey they're wearing at the time. Marcus helped McAuliffe defeat one of the most promising emerging pro-liberty politicians in America. But he wasn't alone. The Republican Governors Association did almost nothing to help Cuccinelli, choosing to help the liberal Chris Christie win his 2013 race in New Jersey that he was never going to lose instead. The Republican National Committee bragged about giving Cuccinelli $3 million, but that was one-third the money it gave his predecessor Bob McDonnell to run in 2009. I even had a friend of mine at the RNC tell me he knew for a fact several big donors withheld money to the RNC until after Cuccinelli lost because they wanted to make sure none of their money went to help him. The story of the betrayal of Cuccinelli, and thus the grassroots, in the 2013 Virginia governor's race will prompt more reactions like what happened in Maine after the 2012 election, when several members of the Republican State Central Committee, as well as a member of its Republican National Committee, resigned and left the Republican Party. They cited Speaker John Boehner's, quote, cowardly leadership, as well as, quote, abandoning key principles for libertarians and conservatives as reasons for their departure. Quote, the Republican Party has lost its way, they wrote. Now, you may disagree with how they've chosen to act on their assessment of the GOP. I am still active in party politics myself, but you'd have to be a complete party shill not to admit their assessment of the party's leadership is largely correct. So let's not blame those who acted on their convictions, even if we don't agree with their actions. Let's put the blame where it belongs, on the Republicrats running the Republican Party, who only care about their own self-interests. They're the ones that continuously inspire us to abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Boyd Marcus himself admitted the truth when he said he was working for McAuliffe because, quote, he seems like the candidate willing to work with both parties to get things done, unquote. Translation, Marcus actually agreed with McAuliffe more than he did Cuccinelli on the issues. Plus, McAuliffe isn't nearly the threat that a Cuccinelli was to the scam of gangster government people like Boyd Marcus who have been profiting off of for years. Marcus, a Republican strategist, wants to beat the Republican nominee for governor for all the reasons you and I would want someone like Cuccinelli elected. So it's time to stop lying to ourselves. For too long, we have come up with every explanation for why the GOP establishment fails. Dumb, gutless, stupid, etc. Rather than accepting the simplest and most obvious explanation. These people are feckless operatives for the very worldview we became Republicans to defeat. Republicrats don't mind being in the minority because then they don't have to actually act on all the conservative cliches they spewed to get elected. Huddling with their incestuous batch of bratty consultants to ponder the lint in their navels while the country falls apart is what they do best. Ignore whatever focus-driven filth called advice these political hacks provide you. Be very wary when they put their arm around you and talk about how many good ideas you have, but you'll probably have to table a few until the public is with you, of course. When they start asking you to lunch, that means you're having an impact, and they're hoping that developing a rapport with you will get you to back down on your principles for the sake of maintaining the relationship. I can't tell you how many of these lunches I've wasted my time with the last few years. Talk, talk, talk. These Republicrats will talk you to death if you let them. But as the great prophet Toby Keith once sang, it's time for a little less talk and a lot more action. The most clear and present danger to the future of this republic is not Democrats, but Republicrats. Because until we defeat Republicrats, we're not even going to get the chance to defeat the Democrats. Republicrats are why the American people don't trust us. We talk about limited government, but once in office, limited government to Republicrats means limiting their political foes' access to the welfare state, but not their own cronies. The first step to defeating these people is to get more and more of our people involved in primaries and supporting principled conservative candidates. Otherwise, we're quickly getting to the point that if the right kind of Republican doesn't win the primary, it really doesn't matter who wins the general election.
And that was Rules for Patriots, How Do Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve-Deace. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Is fear at the root of all sin? And I think you could say yes, even prior to pride. Because what does fear do? I'm afraid, and so I cling defensively. I'm afraid, and so I lash out at you. See, we're all sinners, right? Analyze your sin in terms of fear, and it can be very illuminating. Why am I doing these things that I know are bad? I know they're self-destructive. I think if you are honest and you look deeply enough, you're going to find at the bottom of your sin something like fear. Well, perfect love, I live my life now in God, casts out that fear. Love is always this extroverted move. It's the move outside. And the trajectory of love is in the direction of God, who is love, see? Which is why perfect love, God, casts out all fear. I can live now in imitation of the divine love. What a fundamental spiritual dynamic.
Thank you. And now, a quote from Ayn Rand.
What we need today, what I call the new intellectual, would be any man or woman who is willing to think. Meaning, any man or woman who knows that man's life must be guided by reason, by the intellect, not by feelings, wishes, whims, or mystic revelations. Any man or woman who values his life and who does not want to give in to today's cult of despair, cynicism, and impotence, and does not intend to give up the world to the dark ages and to the rule of the collectivist brute.
And that was Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Thank you. And this one is, self-explanatory.
Many things. It's proof that despite the naysayers, we can make meaningful progress on dealing with gun violence. Because make no mistake, sit down and you'll hear what I have to say.
And that was President Biden giving a speech and being interrupted. What a surprise. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 5 of The Enemies of My Country by Jasob-Kasper.
5. In Sirlik Air Base, Turkey. Cancer took a pull of his cigarette, blowing another cloud of smoke toward the chain-link privacy fence that blocked any view of his surroundings. Above the fence's barbed wire were ordinary-looking pine trees, and beyond them he could hear the sounds of traffic and aircraft, indistinguishable from virtually any military base in America. There were no obvious visual indicators that he was in Turkey, and certainly none that the fence around him blocked off a small compound reserved for special operations forces passing through on their way to and from Syria. Hell, he couldn't even remember much from the plane ride over. 15 hours over the Atlantic had passed in the blink of an eye, courtesy of Ambien sleeping pills. With no opportunity for rest once they launched for the mission tonight, they'd had to get their sleep in advance. Upon arriving at the airbase, the old military axiom of hurry up and wait had proved true. An extensive chain of logistics was set into motion to get the team to and from their upcoming objective, and they faced hours with little to do but fuck off in the small area that had been temporarily allocated to them. Taking a final drag, Cancer snubbed out his cigarette and tossed it in a trash can. He pushed open the door to enter the planning bay and saw David at a desk with his planning materials spread across the surface. Operational graphics, satellite imagery, infiltration and exfiltration plans. David was looking at none of this. Instead, he was ticking off numbers with the fingers of one hand, sounding frustrated as Cancer picked up his words mid-sentence. The chair and ranking members of the Senate and House, and the lead Republican and Democrat in both the House Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That's it. No one's flying us to D.C. when they don't claim us in the first place. Cancer followed David's gaze to Riley, seated on a cot and holding a battered paperback. Riley shook his head. That didn't stop Mitch Rapp, man. David opened his mouth to reply, but Cancer cut him off. What in the fresh hell did I just walk in on? Leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms, David said, Riley wants to know why he can't meet the president. What? Riley raised his paperback and waved it emphatically at Cancer. Don't you read thrillers? The government's secret super assassin always reports directly to the president. Why not us? Cancer looked to David with a deadpan expression. Are you serious? It's hard to say, David said, returning to his planning materials. Riley spoke in a defensive tone. I am serious. After all we go through, I just want a handshake, man. Cancer fixed him with a stony glare. You want to meet a president? Join a campaign team, because he won't get any updates about us until something goes wrong. That happens, it means we're probably dead anyway. Riley shrugged, then opened his paperback to continue reading where he left off. Cancer wasn't worried about him. He was a top-notch medic, and when the previous mission had gone sideways, Riley reacted seamlessly to the shifting plans with little more than a word or two of guidance from his leadership. If there was one thing Cancer could credit to Riley, besides his medical and workout abilities, it was that he was in no danger of overthinking the tactical situation. The same didn't hold true for the next man Cancer's gaze fell upon. Ian, the team's little intelligence guru, was stretched out across a cot, any illusion of relaxation betrayed by his clenched jaw as he listened to headphones, his eyes pinched shut. Cancer walked over to him and kicked the cot. Ian's eyes burst open, and he sat up, meeting Cancer's eyes in alarm as he removed his earbuds. What's up? Nodding to his earbuds, Cancer asked, What are you listening to? Piano Concerto No. 5 in E-flat major. Why? Funny, Cancer grinned. I took you for a gangster rap kind of guy. Really? No. Shouldn't you be tinkering with some electronics? Don't you dare project your technophobia on me, Cancer. I've already booted up, tested function, and shut it down on full power. It's packed, along with all my spare batteries. I'm good to go. Then why do you look so nervous? Ian blinked, responding quietly, Because I am nervous. You do share some DNA with your dad, don't you? Sure you weren't adopted? Ian bristled at the mention of his father, just as he did every time Cancer brought him up. Grant Mad Dog Greenberg was a legendary Special Forces soldier whose combat exploits probably would have warranted his own statue at Fort Bragg, with the small complication that far too many of them were classified. Tales of his glory lived on in the spoken heritage of special operators across service branches and even the agency, where he'd done contract work well into his 60s before retiring. So when Cancer learned that his new team's tech whiz was none other than Mad Dog Greenberg's son, he'd been beside himself with disbelief and, ultimately, disappointment. Ian was technically proficient, but so far the only connection that Cancer could discern between the two men was a vague physical resemblance and a famous last name. During the team's inaugural operation in the Philippines, Ian had to run his electronic gadgets from an offshore boat. And judging by the team's private accounts of Ian's abilities on their previous foray into Syria, that was probably the best thing for everyone involved. For all practical purposes, the mission ahead would be Ian's first real test, not just as an intelligence operative, but as shooter. And Cancer was less than thrilled at the lack of confidence he saw in the man's face. Finally, Cancer said, Listen, Ian, you got nothing to worry about. Just make sure your little robot works. It's not a robot, Ian corrected him. It's actually a pretty sophisticated IMS eye catcher called the Manta, which you'd know if you paid attention to my portion of the mission brief. I don't care what it's called. Get it to make all the right beeps and boops to get us to the target, and we'll take care of the rest. Savvy? Yeah, Ian said. Sure. Shaking his head, Cancer stalked off to find Worthy. He heard Worthy before he saw him, a series of metallic scrapes and clangs echoing from behind the door to the hallway bathroom. Pausing at the open door, Cancer saw Worthy standing before the mirror, wearing his tactical kit over gym shorts and a t-shirt. Worthy raised his rifle to the mirror, pulling the trigger to elicit the hollow click of an empty weapon. Before the echo faded, Worthy canted his rifle up and to the side, stripping the empty magazine and retrieving another one from his kit. By the time his empty mag finished its first bounce off the ground, Worthy had reloaded and resumed his aim on the mirror. Lowering his rifle, he turned to face Cancer and said, in his southern drawl, "What's up, Cancer? You need me?" Cancer shook his head slightly. He never ceased to be amazed by Worthy's endless and obsessive weapons rehearsals. A former competitive shooter at the national level, Worthy spent absurd lengths of time in front of a mirror, alternating between reload drills, dry fire drills, malfunction clearance drills, emergency transition from rifle to pistol. When your call sign was race gun, apparently, the practice never ended. As a result, his hard-earned speed with a weapon was astonishing. Cancer said, "Just making sure your trigger finger doesn't fall off before infill tonight." "Absolutely," Worthy agreed. "Don't worry, I'm taking it easy. Bit of practice calms the nerves, you know?" "No," Cancer replied. "I don't. That's what cigarettes are for." Exiting the bathroom, Cancer stood in the hallway for a moment, watching David hunched over his planning materials, studying the pages for the 100th time since they'd arrived. Cancer had been surprised when David asked him to be second in command of the team. It wasn't a question of experience. Cancer had more of that than anyone else in their ranks, probably more than any two members combined. He'd also fought alongside David twice, both times in the mercenary realm. The first was a multi-day operation in the jungles of South America's Triple Frontier, where David had first taken issue with Cancer's personal brand of warfighting, which was, in a word, ruthless. What else could it be? Combat was an unforgiving realm, and nothing was more important than removing as many enemies from the battlefield as possible, whenever and wherever you found them. If not, they would return the favor to you and your teammates at the first available opportunity. David understood that much, but just barely. The kid had just enough skills to be good in a fight, but just enough morality to feel bad about the fallout. No matter, Cancer thought, some more experience would harden David into less of a touchy-feely team leader. In the meantime, it was up to Cancer to coach David whenever and however he could, and he intended to do just that. "Hey, boss," Cancer called from the hallway. "Talk to you for a second?" David looked up, then quickly rose and approached him. "What's up?" Cancer nodded toward a doorway at the end of the hall, and David followed him into the empty room. Closing the door behind them, David asked, "How are the guys looking to you?" "Fine," Cancer said. "I'm only concerned about one." David gave an understanding nod. "Ian's out of his comfort zone, but he'll deliver on target. I've worked with him more than you have. And don't forget who his dad is. I'm not talking about Ian. I'm talking about you." David recoiled, seeming uncertain if Cancer was being serious. "How so?" "The guys told me about your little Call of Duty sprint to pull that little girl off the street last time we tried to slot BK." "Yup. Ever think what would happen if you got shot in the face?" David's eyes narrowed. "Ever think what would happen if she got shot in the face?" Cancer shook his head. "We ain't Amnesty International, suicide. You get smoked taking some dumb risk, and we gotta deal with it. We got one job, killing bad guys. Don't start thinking there's any good we can accomplish besides that. You make this morality sideshow too much of a hobby, and people are going to get hurt. That girl may be safe, but how many people would die if Duchess couldn't find BK again?" David was unconvinced. "What did you want me to do? Let her get killed? We stand by and do nothing, then we're no better than they are." He shrugged. "We ain't. I'm not talking about the civilians. I'm talking about the terrorists. So am I." David's face turned to stone, his green eyes going flat. "Care to explain that?" "Sure. You care to hear?" Because my advice seems to be falling on deaf fucking ears lately, stopping somewhere short of your officer brain. David huffed a breath, his expression softening. I picked you as my 2IC for a reason, Cancer. Tell me what's on your mind. Those terrorists are the same people as us. Ruthless, violent, willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish their mission. They're on the other side of the ideological fence, sure. But don't think for 1 second that we're different from them. Because the biggest difference between us and the people we're hunting isn't our morality, it's our methods. Remember that.
And that was Chapter 5 of The Enemies of My Country by jasob-kasper. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.